You're listening to the Falconry Podcast with John Griggs and Ben Woodruff. Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Woodruff.
And I'm John Griggs.
And we're here today with the Falconry Podcast. And two falconers with raging ADHD and a passion for the sport of falconry. Just shooting the breeze and talking about subjects that we find interesting and that we hope you do as well. Today, John, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about Merlins, and we had one here, and he disappeared. So
that's right, because John is training a wizard named Merlin, and it has the power to disappear. You know what's really weird about Merlins, though, John? It's always weird.
And he's back.
He's back,
and he's gone.
It's always weird that they that most things like peregrine falcon, prairie falcon, lanner falcon, gyr falcon, Merlin, and kestrel too. We don't say kestrel falcon.
No, we don't.
Merlins and kestrels. Nobody says kestrel falcon. But if you look up kestrel online, you're going to find information. The bad thing is, if you're trying to learn about Merlins, if you pull up Merlin, it's going to pull up wizards and people's names.
And every time that I talk about my Merlins, they're like, "Oh, you're the guy," because at work I'm known as the bird guy, the guy who trains birds and stuff. And so even though the only kinds of birds I have are raptors, they'll say, "Hey, what kind of bird do you have?" And I'm like, "Well, it's a Merlin. It's a type of falcon." So I never leave it at that. I always say it's a Merlin, a type of falcon. I never say Merlin falcon, because to me, it's a little grating.
It almost sounds like a very novice-y type thing to do. But again, in the internet world, that makes things strange because it's hard. Because if you look up Merlin, again, it's hard to find information about Merlins. But not even falconers say Merlin falcon unless we have to specify. So, neat birds, though. Why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about Merlins.
Well, this is really my first experience with Merlins. I did have one Merlin before, if you recall. But we're pretty sure that she may have got attacked when she was on a meal. So she really just wasn't good for falconry. So that was my only opening experience with Merlins was just this bird that was really freaky and stuff. So I was like, not really excited to try them. But they're really one of the only micros that I hadn't tried out and been successful with. So I got my Tsuklei female, and have been flying her, and then my wife got this male that's back behind us right here. So my experience with them has been surprising. It hasn't been what I expected it to be. I expected something like a big kestrel, or a big kestrel that has had a lot more stamina and could fly long distances, but it isn't quite like that. They have a completely different temperament than kestrels do.
But Matt Mullenix, the other day I saw him. He's the guy who wrote the kestrel. He wrote the book about American kestrels and falconry. But he did a post the other day, and I'm not saying it word for word. I was trying to find it just now, but it was basically Merlins and kestrels are pretty close in size, but a Merlin is a large falcon like a gyr, condensed down to the density of a gold brick, where a kestrel is like a razor sharp blade, like a razor sharp shard of glass wrapped in like floss, like cotton candy. And I'm like, I actually like that. That's true. They're both deadly hunters, but even though they're close in measurements, they're so different. They are so very different. Well, I want to tell you, I hated Merlins in principle when I knew nothing. I got into falconry as a kid. You were enamored into it too. We had this love of raptors, but John and I are peregrine guys, right? That's the falcon for us. But as I tried all different types of raptors in my little falconry career, I kept not doing Merlins. And if you want to show that one picture from the book, my favorite, this picture is the biggest reason why I did not fly a Merlin for decades.
I can see why. I mean,
they look like sissy birds.
A little frou-frou.
Little frou-frou, little pastel. The malar stripe under the eye is weak sauce. And they just kind of look like, hi, I'm a kestrel.
What's the female doing with its wings in that picture?
Yeah,
it's kind
of dropping them. But that was my thing.
It's not that I've never seen one do that. It's just that, I don't know.
It's a very odd choice for the pose.
It's odd, yeah.
It really is. And that was kind of my thing. And most of the falconers when I was young in Utah that had been practicing a long time were flying peregrines, prairies, or gyr peregrines. That was most of them were doing. So I didn't see Merlins. And then I finally did. I met Al Ross, who's one of the kind of the old guard, true gentlemen of falconry, masters of the Merlin, and well known around the world as a Merlin master. And he came out. He's a master artist too, and I always jokingly refer to him as the Santaquin gnome because he always has the coolest facial hair. It's always different, but it looks like he just walked out of Lord of the Rings. And he's like, "Oh, I'm an artist, and here's my Merlin," and it's just he looks like this mythological figure. But just talking with him and seeing his Merlin in flight really opened my eyes. And I finally, went out and trapped a Merlin, and they're nothing.
They're pretty
like
cool.
They're awesome. They are such cool birds.
They're very, very smart, incredibly fast on the take up.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably say one of the fastest birds on really figuring things out that I've ever flown.
Yeah, and there's certain things when it comes to mass where once you're a certain size, it's not just the bigger you are, the more energy it takes to have lift or propulsion. It's not that simple. There are certain sizes where all of a sudden you're the perfect size between big enough to be able to have momentum against the power of the pull of gravity, but small enough to not be overly limited by it. And that's a Merlin. You hit that again once you're getting up to the big anotum female peregrine or small male peals. That's the same thing where you're like, once you get into the gyr, you either have to have more musculature or you have to have broader wings to be able to do that, which gyrs have both. Merlins are perfect. They're just like a gold bar with a jetpack.
They're little bullets. I mean, little race cars. They're a blast to trap too.
They are. But that's half of the joy of it, especially here in Utah.
I like trapping Merlins.
We're kind of spoiled, aren't we, in Utah? Yeah. There's a lot of things in Utah that are not good. Our laws are pretty hefty and strict, and we don't always have the best quarry numbers depending on what you're hunting, but we get a lot of Merlins coming through first weekend of October through, I mean we have them through April. I've seen them in April, but we're not catching them that late. And you have your pick of 3 subspecies. We've talked about subspecies of Merlins before, but man, they're great. Now in traditional Europe, there's a lot of times where a Merlin was trapped early and was flown for the first few months of the season, which is, fall going into winter, and were primarily hunted on sky larks, which is a very acrobatic, athletic flight that'll blow your mind, and then set free before you're even into the thick of the season. Now, in America, we hunt a quarry that is non-native mostly. This is not what I normally do. We'll get to some of my stories in a minute, but do you want to talk a little bit about what's the primary quarry and how Merlins are usually used here in the States, at least in the West?
I think the most popular method of hunting Merlins is an open flight on starlings. Mm-hmm. There's variations, obviously, but it's going to be starlings and sparrows because they're oftentimes going to be adjacent to one another. But I've flown mine on starlings. I've flown the male on some sparrows and starlings before he got sick. He's recovering right now. But yeah, it's mostly starlings, ringing flights.
Yeah, and we in America, starlings were introduced, and European starlings, and a lot of other countries, they're vaunted and highly respected. And here, they are not really appreciated because they displace and drive out a lot of our native species from their nesting and have just taken over. And so we're actually very much encouraged by the government to hunt these flocks. So a lot of times these are not the close-up flights you might do with a kestrel. It's like, okay, I'm going to put this Merlin up, take its hood off, maybe even from your car window, and it might fly up and land on a pole, and you're looking at a flocks of starlings feeding a mile and a half away. The bird preens and, looks around, ruffles, it suns itself, and then it's like, wait a minute, a mile away. whoa, starts bobbing, and then it's, and by the time it hits that flock, it's going a million miles an hour. It's like a jet fighter. Now we say that a lot of times about birds. Oh, a hawk is a jet fighter. No, I mean as in it is 100% momentum driven. When a jet fighter is going a trillion miles an hour, it can't turn on a dime and just go like a drone can. It's got to follow through, and nothing can stop it. And that's a Merlin. And ringing up these flocks of starlings, it's like a shark with a school of a billion fish, and it's just
Hawks are more like A-10s, which technically are a fighter, but I mean the Merlin is more like an F-16, and I'll tell you why. So F-16s, they perform really well in what's called a two-circle fight. That's a nose-to-tail fight where the plane that has the smallest turning circle, or not the smallest turning circle, sorry, the plane that can get around the turning circle the fastest. So maintaining your speed, maintaining your energy is key to a dogfight in an F-16. The second the F-16 starts pulling hard on the stick and bleeding all of its energy, aka maybe accipiters, it slows down and is no longer able to turn. Whereas Merlins and Jeers, I think both, are both birds that seem to want to maintain that energy in their turn to get around that turning circle faster. The turning circle may be bigger, but they're going to get around it faster because they maintain their speed.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why building momentum can be better. You can hawk a Merlin off the fist. You can car hawk a Merlin. You can do close slips. But a lot of people here in our neck of the woods, they do these flights that are really long, and the Merlin is building up speed and is charging towards the flock before they even know it's there. So it is full speed by the time it gets there, which is just pretty incredible to watch. You really liked kind of the style that Eric Edwards was doing.
Oh yeah,
back in the day.
Yeah, I have to admit that one of the things that made me interested in Merlins, but didn't actually get me over that hump of this is not a peregrine, because how I was totally obsessed with those as an apprentice and as an early general, is that's all I wanted, but ended up never getting one. But anyway, that was a story from before. I thought Merlins were cool, but I really hadn't ever seen someone flying one. I hadn't got a lot of experience. You had one at some points during things, but I was always busy with running the Kestrels.
Yeah, we weren't flying together that winter much.
Yeah, but when I started watching, these were videos prior to YouTube, so this was like pre-YouTube internet, where
weird to think
finding these things uploaded places, and there were. But again, I was a creature of the internet back then too, so I found them and started, I guess, in a way, cyber stalking the guy, because I was really interested in the way he was flying. And I think I even emailed him a long time ago and just asked him questions and gathered some information, but never ended up flying a Merlin. But yeah, the style that he was flying at the time, and if he's watching this and wants to correct me, welcome to, is very active flight style where the birds are actively making passes on you, flying around you. And then it would obviously make anything that was prey put in immediately. And of course, in his area, it was perfect for this, because there were small bunches of little weeds and stuff where the birds could put in. Sparrows, mostly, I think is what he said. And so they would basically watch for a Merlin coming in, beat the brush, flush the thing out, and then the Merlin would come in and make a pass on it and maybe catch. And according to what he wrote years ago, hopefully my memory is working for me here, because it's not great. When he was flying two of them at the same time, I think he was flying a male and a female, it would actually encourage them to carry and cash and come back to get back into that competition that was going on, right? So I don't know, that was, to me, was completely fascinating on how, and I really wanted to do things like that with Kestrels, but I don't think that when I was messing around with it, I just don't think that they're prone to do that. I think that
Yeah,
merlins,
kestrels are kind of wired differently. Their stamina.
they want to sit and watch for game and then go after it, whereas the merlin seems to want to do it from on the wing.
Mm-hmm.
And they may perch for a while and then spot something way off in the distance and then come in, and then they want to be on the wing. They want to work the flock. They want to get them into a position. They want to go through and catch stuff. I've seen so many birder videos posted by birders where they're like, oh, look how beautiful this murmuration is. And they call it a murmuration.
Of all the
And
starlings moving in and out.
They say nothing about it, but the second that I see them go whoosh and then back together, I'm like, so I start watching it over again, and there's the merlin zipping through the formation. I'm like,
working the flock.
I'm like, yeah, this is pretty cool looking flock action here, but you missed the coolest thing about it, and that's the merlin that's hunting them. And oftentimes I've got, how did you see it? And I'm like, well, this ain't my first rodeo. I've watched these for a while, because I'll do that. I'll be driving along down the freeway and I'll see a flock of starlings out there and see them make one of those moves where maybe they're all down here and then all of a sudden you see them all squish into the ground and then go up like this, and I'm like, they're being worked. Yep. I'm gonna stop and watch them.
Or else they're kind of doing their thing, and then they all come close together and then cut in half and and then go like this. You're like, something just dove through there. You pull over. You're like, oh, yep.
And so it's fun to watch. I mean, you could sit there and just watch this merlin just work the flock, and I love it because some of them will push the flock to the ground, and then once they're to the ground, it removes one of their avenues, and then it goes through and catches one, or goes through and misses or whatever. But the ones that I've watched my bird do, she's usually made one or two passes, and we've had a little bit of success at it, but still need to keep working on it. Unfortunately, we did that falconry class and my birds got sick. Luckily, they're going to both be fine.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting thinking about that flock hawking mentality, which again speaks to the ability. We've talked before about how birds, and raptors in particular, have a much higher frame rate. They process visual information with more frames. I know that's a digital term, but than we do. And so, like, if we always say, here's the example, take your hand, wave it in front of your face, even on the screen, right? See that blur, motion blur. They don't see a motion blur. They go into a flock, and the flutter of wings they don't see. If you watched in slow motion, that is how the flap of each wing, the movement of each bird, in crystal clarity with no motion blur, that is how a merlin charging into a flock of starlings experiences them. Doesn't see in slow motion, but that's the only thing we can equate it to, because for us, if you have a slow motion video, you can that is picking up more frames, then we can kind of see what they see, but they see it at full speed, which our brain is not even wired to be able to imagine what that would be like.
We see about 24 frames per second, between 24 and 30 frames per second for a person. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't tell the difference between 30 frames per second and 120. It's actually been well proven in gaming and sims and stuff like that, and even especially in things like this.
Yeah, VR.
Yeah, in VR. If you can
recognize the difference,
but what it does for us is it just looks smoother, but we really don't. We see about 30 frames per second. Now, in addition to that, it might not be inaccurate, and I would love to see studies on this to prove this out, but it might not be inaccurate that they do see more frames per second, meaning that their eyes and brain process things at a faster rate. It doesn't mean that they're smarter. It just means that it has a faster refresh rate, because it would certainly appear to be so.
Yeah, if you had a goshawk or a Cooper's hawk going through a dense forest, you're like, how on earth can they process that? I'm sure they're wired different as well, but again, seeing more visual information processed more quickly without motion blur, it's like, okay, well, then, I mean, obviously they have a faster processing time as far as response, but still, it's pretty incredible.
There's also been experiments that have talked about the way that other creatures experience time, and that the smaller you are, on average, you experience time at a slower rate. I don't know if that's exactly true, but just theorizing and thinking about things, because obviously they see things, that they can go through things at a much faster pitch than we do.
Yeah. And I think it's good the more we learn about these, it's good to learn about this kind of thing and to talk about it, because we are at the front line of thousands of years of effective training techniques. However, as we as humans are learning and understanding more about life, consciousness, how the brains of different life forms work, what's similar, what's different, we can excel and have totally new training techniques based off of those kind of understandings. That you could be like, well, but if it's not broken, don't fix it. But honestly, let's keep moving forward in falconry and see what else we can learn and accomplish. I think it's really good. Well, I think we ought to tell a few stories. Talk about some of our birds. You got any pictures of yours?
Yeah,
I got some of mine.
Let me
want to talk about some personalities.
I
got some funny stories too. So
obviously, you're probably going to have a bunch more stories than I do.
I'll try to keep them short.
But
Jessica, I'll be like, ho, because she was my favorite Merlin ever. Not my best, but she was awesome.
Okay, so this one is one of the first pictures we took of my bird. This is Starbuck, and she's a Suclei Merlin. This is her from the front.
I know some of you Pacific Northwestern falconers are like, you call that a Suclei? That's not black at all. But in Utah, we would consider that a Suclei.
She's a good bird. It's interesting that the temperament of these different birds vary so much. So Starbuck is incredibly patient, incredibly kind. Hood's like a dream almost.
Mm-hmm.
She's been getting a little. I raised her weight up over the last month and to help her to kind of recover from this thing, and she's got a bit more of an attitude now than she had when she was a little bit hungrier. But she's a really, really well behaved bird. Just an ideal in terms of handling.
Now, how much would you say now? You got a setup where you have these birds with you all the time, and a lot of times you're working from home. How much of her good personality do you think comes from just her as an individual, and how much do you think is from being overly social and not having her in a mew outside?
I'm sure that's a factor. I mean, one of my birds is to my right hand side, and the other one is behind me, and I got one of them on a shelf perch, and then one of them is on a pole perch. And I switch them each day. But they're really good that way. And then this is the back of our male. This is my wife's bird. And
now Americans, just so you know, Americans are really bad about this, me included. Normally, if you're being technical with falcons, a male and a female have different terms. A female is called a falcon, although some people say a hen, and a male is called a tercel. That's different with Merlins. A female could still be called a falcon, depending on who you talk to, what part of the world. But a male Merlin is called a jack. So if you hear somebody saying a jack Merlin, so this is a male, so it's technically a jack Merlin.
Yep, this is our jack. And he is a Richardson's, though he is a little bit on the darker side, but the head still really says Richardson's. Mm-hmm. I've trapped a bunch of Columbarius, and the one difference I always see is that they're not quite as dark, like especially on the chest, where if we go back to her, this doesn't even illustrate it. When I look over at her right now, she is really black, and these striping, this really connects. The striping connects to each other and really overlaps one another. Whereas the Columbarius ones that I've caught are more, the streaks are separated, and the streaks on their chest aren't really dark. They're kind of a brownish color.
Flank ones are more brown.
Yep. But they still have this, like, it's almost a hood where on the nape of their neck and also the top of their head is still brown.
Uh-huh.
but you can still see those lighter cheeks in the columbarius that I've caught. So she doesn't have that, but you can see how you're getting blonde all the way back onto the head. And when
Yeah.
you see him in person, it's actually more. See, here's another one of her. You see how these marks get so dark
Mm.
here.
And these are not like Merlins are hard to photograph. Merlins have
Yeah.
a feather quality like an adult Cooper's hawk. It's the bane of every wildlife painter, where in certain lights you're like, that's a warm brown on the back, and then in other lighting you're like, that's a cold reflective blue. There's nothing warm about it. There's no brown in it. And another image you're like, that's straight brown. So again, pictures aren't perfect.
And this is him. You see how much way more blonde he is through the chest and on the head.
Mm-hmm. Look at those feet.
Yeah. He's
Those are some
got good
proper feet right there.
Yep. And so that's those guys, and there's me when I caught him. Yay!
Do.
And that's all of them that I have.
Well, let's talk about not my first Merlin, but my favorite. Let's take a look at Jessica. Was a Suckley I had. Suckleis are supposed to be the smallest of our 3 subspecies that we get in Utah. They're not always, but she was not very big. And if you look at her tail, I know some of you will be like, you can't have that much banding on the deck feathers of the tail and that would be a Sucklei. What are you going to do? She was incredible. And I like to hunt Merlins in ways not traditionally. My favorite thing to hunt with them are pigeons, doves, and quail. Quail I usually do off the fist or try to do it off of a rise. But pigeons, I love to just kind of put the Merlin up on a building. Then I walk to the other side of a dirt lot where there's pigeons, start swinging the lure, charge the pigeons. They flush towards the Merlin and they grab them. In the old days, Merlins were inaccurately called pigeon hawks. They're not a hawk, but they absolutely can kill pigeons and doves as well. I got a couple other pictures here of her on some doves. She was a murderous dove slayer. Now, I flew her for a couple of seasons. She got really good at what she did. And then, I think the next 2 are probably also her. But the really interesting thing about her is that after flying her a couple of seasons, I set her free. That was that, right? But then 3 years later, I was out trapping, and it was a snowy day, and I trapped a Merlin in the middle of a snowstorm, and I looked down, and she had a release band on her, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is Jessica. I go home, I brought her home, looked up the numbers, I'm like, yeah, and so I called up the Division of Wildlife and asked the people in charge. I'm like, hey, this is the bird I had flown. Can I fly her again for a season as a retrap? And I still recorded her on my capture permit, but and they said yes. So I flew her for an additional season. That's really cool to think. Here's this bird that migrates out of state. Flew her for 2 seasons, set her free. 3 years later, trap her again and flew her for another season. And she was. I mean, that's cool. Think
That's
about
really
all.
cool.
What happened in her life over those 3 years, and then to reconnect and fly again. And once I got her back that second time, I already had another Merlin at the time that I started flying her in a cast with, and that was really cool to fly them together and have the old experienced bird, showing the young one what to do.
Yeah, we considered doing that with these 2.
Uh-huh.
He actually likes to fly out car window, whereas she won't have any of it. She's okay, like if I stop the car, roll down the window, and then hold her out for a second, and then she'll go off and find a perch. But she doesn't like to just go out right from there. So that is really cool. So it'll be an experience if we get a chance to fly these things in a cast.
And for that, if you on here, I have only flown Merlins in a cast with females, 2 females. I've done that more than once. Have any of you out there ever or know other falconers who have flown a jack or a male Merlin with a female as a cast? If so, let us know about it. That'd be really cool. Let's see. Let's try the next picture. I'm not sure if this is... That next one might be Jessica too. We might skip ahead. Let's see. That's Jessica. She killed those 2 doves 10 minutes apart. That was a good day.
Yeah, that is a good day.
That's a good day. Let's do the next picture. Should be Kita, which was a Merlin I flew for a season, and she was doing great. Flew her with Jessica, and then set them both free in the spring. But my favorite story about her You can go ahead and take the picture down on that one because I got to wave my hands around for this one. She was my best lure flyer, and that's what a lot of people love Merlins because they're so acrobatic when you're stooping them to a lure. I was doing it one day at a park, and there was like a foot of snow on the ground and on the roof of the park pavilion. So she's flying, diving, stooping, doing her thing, and then she went up and tried to land up on the roof of the pavilion. And when she did, she crashed through the snow. Because remember, there's a foot of snow. And she's like, huh? So I call her back down, and she had it was very packed snow over blocking her eyes. She could see sideways, but she couldn't see forward. It literally looked like a Merlin with a snowball for a head. And she's like, oh, and she just kind of like fluttering like a butterfly. It was hilarious. She was a good one. Let's see. Next picture I think is probably Jack, or no, it's probably Asgina. Let's see. This is one of the this is one of the biggest. This I just want to show how urban these birds are. She was great, but the whole reason I wanted to bring her up, it's just kind of a fun story. It was sunset, and I was flying my Harris Hawk, just some exercise flights up to a T-perch in my front yard, and she comes in out of nowhere and starts dive bombing my Merlin, or my Harris Hawk, and I'm like, what? And so I'm like, wait a minute, I got stuff already. So I literally throw my Harris Hawk in the front room, which is Maddie. I'm not throw, but here, go land on it. Close the door, get in the back of my truck, set up, the net and the bait right in my front, right at sunset. I was actually a little after sunset and caught her right, 10 feet from my front door. And she was a good bird, but I mean, that was kind of a fun one because, you spend all this time and money going looking around for birds and then self-delivering Merlin in your front yard.
I caught one in my front yard this year too.
Yeah.
Well, the street out in front of my house, it was a Richardson's hag female.
Yeah. It's awesome that they're that urban. So many Merlins are that way. The last one is a Merlin named Jack. That I know it's a dumb name. A male Merlin is a Jack, and I named him Jack. I flew him for a couple of seasons, and just the noteworthy part I want to make about him is during a training flight. I think it was his first free flight. I was just training him and had him a week. I was doing my first free flight. And he goes past me and flies and catches a starling that I didn't even know was there. Took it to the ground, and I went and picked him up. I'm like, geez, you have that's when I was really sold on Merlins, was with this guy. I'm like, wow, if you can be that good, that you can accidentally, unintentionally, with no input from the falconer, catch prey on your first free flight when you're not trying to have them go after prey. That's impressive. So that was just a few fun stories, just thinking about some of the Merlins. We had so many over the years. They're just really fun birds.
I once had Starbuck work a flock of starlings right into my Jeep. Like they all went right past my Jeep, and a couple of them even came right in my window, and we're inside the cabin. I'm trying to catch them. And I go to roll up the window, and they get out. So I didn't catch any of them that time. And that's actually the second time that sort of thing has happened to me. I was flying my female kestrel, and she went down on a group of starlings, and two of them came at the car. One came in the window and hit the opposite window and knocked itself out.
Oh man!
And then of course she came in after it and caught it, but. But this one,
falconry in your car.
Yeah, in the car.
Successfully caught game. Where were you? In my vehicle.
So what I was doing with Starbuck is I had let her go, and she ran after the flock. So I drove up and pulled into the farm and just kind of parked and was watching her. And that's when she got him down to the ground, and then that happened. But so that was fun.
And it's interesting too, where I get. In a survival situation, animals do what they do, but the idea of falconry is so abstract to the quarry that it is interesting when they'll do that. Or like you talked earlier, where you're out there, your Merlin's working a flock of starlings, and all of a sudden the starlings land on the ground right next to you. I've had that happen. You've had that happen. That's something that happens because they're like, ha, we'll just hide by this human. No self-respecting predator will go wandering by a human. It's just...
I've had rabbits when I was hunting my Harris hawk in Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
I've had rabbits that flushed in and ran right to my feet and stopped. And so, of course, I'm kicking him on to get him to go and get my bird to come after him. Of course, he had gone off and didn't see it, so he missed it. But yeah, he flushed them. He would oftentimes flush tons of things to me. Like, oh, here's a roadrunner. Hey, why didn't you catch that? I flushed it right to you. But,
Yeah, because the whole pack hunting thing, they're just that way. I was going to say too, I forgot to mention one thing about Jessica. Why I also really liked her is, again, I like hunting pigeons with merlins. Most merlins, you want to rush in to help them take out the pigeon. Pigeons are big, powerful birds. They weigh more than a merlin, and they're just all muscle, and their wings are stiff. Merlin can do it, but usually, they're like, they've got 2 feet on and they're mantling over. Not Jessica. I'm assuming she had killed pigeons in the wild. Otherwise, how would she have known this? But every pigeon that she would ever catch, I'd go running up to her, and she would have 1 foot on the ground, 1 foot around the pigeon's neck, and she'd be looking over at me like, "Gah!" and she would just like squeeze into the pigeon's like, and I'm like, whoa, it's a vicious little bird, and she would just completely overpower them. And anybody who's ever held a pigeon knows the feathers around the neck and crop of a pigeon are very dense. It's part of their protection. And she would just, it was like Darth Vader. And she'd look over at me like, thanks for coming over to help. But I didn't need your help, human. She was great. So they all have, like you said, they all have different personalities.
Well, it's a lot like Isis. Isis figured out just to grab a hold of the starling and hold it at leg's length. She would be like this. She'd turn her head away.
This is
Kestrel.
Kestrel. If you haven't followed this channel yet, this is an amazing Kestrel John flew.
Yeah, Isis she would catch him, hold them at leg's length, like she would extend out her whole legs and then pull her wings back like that, and then turn her head away.
Yeah,
and so
the starlings all got long beaks. They'll try to peck at the face and the eyes of a bird.
She caught so many of them. I mean, she caught hundreds and hundreds of them. So it was something where she learned, because there was more than one time when she would be grabbed by the face or bitten or whatever. So she figured out real quick, I got to keep these things away from me. So it's interesting how they learn behaviors like that, just like your merlin learn that behavior, just clenching the neck of the pigeon.
Mm-hmm. They learn fast.
I have tried throwing the bird on quail, but then the quail season ended, and so after that I was like, well, can't try those anymore. We'll just go for the starlings.
Yeah.
She was just barely hunting when the quail season was still on here in December. So
they have a hard time getting quail. But if they are onto them, they can hold them. That's what I've seen. They don't have the highest rate of actually binding to them, but if they get a foot on them, usually they've got them. We're hunting Gamble's quail out here. Mm-hmm. Is the species we hunt. I guess we should specify that. That's what we're used to, because we're like, it's a quail. This is what we have. It's like, oh yeah, like we don't have bobwhites in Utah. And so many falconers are always talking about bobwhite hunting, and we're like, oh yeah, that's a thing. And you're like, yeah, Utah people, of course it is.
Well, the thing that my Cooper sock would hit quail, but he'd just end up with feathers. But I really think that the Merlin has a stronger foot than my Sharpies, that's for sure.
Yes, yeah.
Much stronger grip.
Longer toes, but a stronger grip as well. The musculature behind it is stronger.
Even my the male Coopers had a bit. They had that really big grip with their 2 toes, the hallux and the first toe, but the Merlins do seem to have a pretty good grip on them, and they bite a lot harder. Yeah. Different
styles, which is interesting. That basically a sharpshin is built to go after small songbirds. Basically, a Merlin is built to go after
males.
Yeah, and yet they couldn't be built more differently. Both of them. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna have to see. I think I do have I'll put it in here because we're kind of wrapping up here, but I'll put it in later. But I got a picture of a Merlin and a sharpshin side by side, and I think they're both hooded in the picture, if I remember right. But it gives you a sense of just even the proportions, wing length, tail length, breadth of the chest, feet, everything.
Here, I've got a Merlin picture that I'll show here, if I can find it. But yeah, the funny thing is that in comparing Merlins to other birds, right? One of the things I've had is I've had a female and a male Sharpie, and my female Sharpie was getting wasn't being dropped down yet, but she was about 200 grams, which is about the same size as my female. So a female Sharpie, almost the same size as a female Merlin, and of course there's lots of variation, just mind you. But the male Sharpie flew at 74 grams, whereas this male Merlin will never get that low. He was flying outside just about a week ago at 125 grams, so not quite the same. Oh, where is this picture? If you remember what picture this is, it's the one on the tailgate of the truck.
Oh yeah.
Maybe I don't have them. Maybe I don't have it in here. Oh, I guess I don't have that one, but maybe you can add it in post through the magic of editing.
The magic of editing, brought to you by the digital age. Soon we'll all be taken over by artificial intelligence and be obsolete. But until that time, huzzah!
It is on my Facebook if you can't find it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll plug that in
after. There's one. Sorry. I did find it isn't the same one, but this is it's from the same moment, but it's the prairie falcon only. Never mind. So never mind that one.
Okay. Well, do we have anything else we want to go over again? This is not the all-encompassing, we want to teach you everything about Merlins. I just thought, you know what? John's flying a couple Merlins this season, and I thought, you know what? Let's talk Merlins. Merlins are fun.
They're really cool. I am going to be flying a peregrine this year, but I could definitely see myself continuing to fly Merlins, even if it's just I have to fly them both.
They're enjoyable.
I love them. They're fun. They're great birds.
Yeah, you do it right, you have a blast. Merlins are, they're about having fun. I mean, they're performance athletes, but it's just compared to a lot of the other big falcons you can fly, they give you more headaches, and Merlins are just fun. They are a blast. Well, before we wrap up, last week's skull was this one, which is a koala. A lot of you had some really good guesses. We even had wombat as a guess. It's related to wombats. But you would never guess looking for the front, considering how wide the head looks and how poofy on a koala. So next week's I'm going to do two of them. I'm going to give you two because I'm not doing a skull. These are extinct animals. First one is a tooth. Let's see, I'll put that back here a little more. That is the chewing surface. That's the root. This is probably a 10, 15-year-old individual when it died. And as a bonus, this is a leg bone. This particular species is extinct, but it has modern counterparts as well that are still around. Both of these are from the New World, and both of them have modern counterparts in the Old World. See if you can figure out what they are. And, of course, John, you want to just... you can check out John's channel. You want to tell him your channel?
Yeah, I do hardware reviews for flight sim hardware, like this thing. This is something I just barely got today. I'm going to be doing I guess you guys are getting a preview. My channel doesn't even have this yet. But yeah, I do flight sim hardware, space sim hardware, do some falconry flights, but that isn't the main focus of my channel. I might be doing a second one that focuses more on the outdoor stuff, four-wheeling, falconry, hiking, stuff like that. But
making fun of me for walking my llama,
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Right?
Yeah, constantly goading you into trying to ride the llama. But yeah, if you want to check it out, it's in the comment section down below. It's getting to be much bigger than it used to be, so I would really appreciate it.
Yep. Also, let us know any questions or comments you have down below, and we'll catch you next week. And as always, happy hawking.